My name is Elyra Kane, I'm 32, and this week, my entire family gathered at the Oregon coast for a reunion. Laughter, champagne, the perfect view, except the estate they were celebrating in? It's mine. It should have been a joyful homecoming, but instead I watched them walk into the house they tried to sell behind my back, unaware that I already owned it. For years, I was the forgotten one, the girl whose name vanished from invitations, the daughter they said was too fragile to handle real things. Before I tell you how I made every one of them confront the truth they buried, hit like if you've ever been the quiet one forced to get loud. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's a small click, but it's what keeps stories like mine alive. I never expected to feel like a stranger in my own family. But that morning, standing alone in my Portland apartment, something shifted. The envelope wasn't addressed to me, but I opened it anyway. A thick cream-colored card slid out, embossed, elegant, unmistakably Holt. At the top, in swirling gold letters, "You're invited to the annual Holt family reunion, Oregon Coast Estate." I stared at it. No mention of my name, not even a +1. The coastal estate, our childhood escape, our family's crown jewel, had been my father's sanctuary, and mine, until I vanished from the family photos. I set the invitation down, fingertips lingering on the glossy paper. It smelled faintly of lavender and ink, almost like it was mocking me. 10 years since I'd heard a real word from any of them. No calls, no birthdays, no apologies. And of course, Vespera. My sister's name was all over this. Her handwriting, her flair for grand gestures, her calculated exclusions. She always knew how to silence a room, or a sibling. I crossed the room and opened my laptop. I wasn't sure why. Maybe some twisted curiosity. I typed Holt Coastal Estate into the browser. A listing popped up. My breath hitched. For sale. By some LLC I'd never heard of. The screen glowed cold blue as I read the fine print. Pending approval. Seller undisclosed. Closing soon. My mouth went dry. Were they selling it? Without me? No. They couldn't. Could they? I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a mixture of betrayal and confusion. A decade of silence, and this was the endgame? Sell the house and wipe me from the legacy? I stood up too fast. The room tilted. A memory stirred, distant, fuzzy, Dad's voice, late at night by the fireplace. "This place will always be yours, Elyra. Don't let anyone take it from you." I had brushed it off then, thought it was one of those sentimental things fathers say. But now it sounded like a warning. I wrapped my sweater tighter and stepped to the window. Outside, the January drizzle clung to the glass like dust on a memory. A streetlight flickered. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. I could almost hear Vespera's voice again. "You were always too soft for this family." But maybe I wasn't soft. Maybe I'd just been quiet. Until now. I opened the drawer under the kitchen counter, the one with all the neglected adulting stuff, and pulled out the file marked Dad, faded utility bills, an old photo of him fishing off the estate cliffs, and nothing useful. My fingers trembled as I closed the folder. Then they stilled. No more guessing, no more being erased. I pulled on my coat. The weight of it felt like armor. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew where I had to start. The truth was buried somewhere along that wind-battered coastline, under layers of fog, salt, and silence, and I was ready to dig. I didn't sleep that night. The rain hadn't let up. It kept tapping at the window like an impatient guest. I lay on the couch, not the bed, curled beneath a blanket that didn't do much against the draft slipping through the old frame. My laptop was still open across from me, the listing for the estate glowing like a dare. I closed my eyes, and before I knew it, I wasn't in Portland anymore. I was 12 again, barefoot on creaky floorboards, the scent of pine and old smoke thick in the air. The fireplace crackled just enough to keep the chill from our toes. Dad sat across from me, cross-legged on the rug, his sleeves rolled up, his hair a mess from the wind outside. He held something in his hand, a small bird carved from wood, barely the size of a fist, its wings tucked in, its eyes just soft grooves cut with care. "Here," he said, handing it to me like it was more than just a trinket. "This place is yours to keep, Elyra." The fire popped. I held the bird gently, the grain smooth under my fingers. Even if I'm not? I asked. He smiled then, not the big kind, just the one he saved for late nights and quiet truths. You'll always be part of this place, even if they forget, even if they pretend not to see you. I clutched the bird tighter. Something about his tone, gentle but heavy, made my stomach twist, even back then. The door slammed. Ugh, seriously? Vespera's voice cut through the warmth like glass through water. Are you still pretending she's the heir? I flinched. Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. He just stood up slowly, brushing ash from his jeans. I'm tired of this fantasy, Vespera sneered, tossing her coat onto the bench like she owned the place. She's not getting anything. You know that, right? I remember the way she looked at me, like I was a smudge on her perfect picture. Dad didn't answer. He just watched the fire for a long time before walking out of the room. The silence he left behind was colder than the wind outside. I woke with a start, heart pounding. The rain was still falling. My hands were clenched around the blanket like it was going to disappear. The ache in my chest hadn't dulled with time. That moment had carved itself deep, not just Vespera's words, but Dad's silence. Why hadn't he said anything? I stood restless, crossing the room toward the shelf where I kept a small box of things I never unpacked. Things from the estate, from before everything unraveled. There it was, the bird. I hadn't touched it in years. Dust coated its wings now, but when I picked it up, the wood still felt warm in my palm. I sat down at the kitchen table, set it in front of me like it might answer a question I hadn't known how to ask. Why did you give me this, Dad? I whispered. And why didn't you fight harder for me? The silence had no answers. Later that morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the memory. Something about it scratched at the inside of my skull, a piece I hadn't understood. I remembered what happened after Vespera left the room. The house had gone quiet, but their voices carried, just barely. Mom's voice, sharp and low. You're going to let her believe she has a future with the estate? She has every right to it, Dad said. You think she can handle it? She has more heart than any of you give her credit for. And then, quieter. Too quiet for me to hear clearly back then. A single word. Fail-safe. I hadn't thought about that in years. Not until now. What did he mean by that? My pulse quickened. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. If he'd planned something, left something, it had to be tied to that estate. But Vespera had always been ahead, always louder, always in the room when I wasn't. She knew how to twist silence into power, how to make my absence feel like a choice. I still remembered the way she laughed at my college graduation when I told her I wanted to design houses that felt like stories. You mean houses that get torn down and replaced? She'd smirked. Cute. That's the thing with Vespera. She never needed to raise her voice, just tilt her head and make you feel small. But this time, she had no idea I was watching. No clue I knew the house was on the market. She thought I'd stay buried. I wrapped the bird in an old scarf, slipped it into my coat pocket, and grabbed the keys. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, but I knew the answer wasn't here. As I walked out into the drizzle, I looked up at the sky, the color of bruised slate, and exhaled. Whatever Dad meant, it wasn't finished, and if Vespera thought I was going to stay quiet, again, she'd forgotten one thing. I remember everything. The drive to the estate took 4 hours, though it felt both faster and slower than that. Time slipped strangely as I watched the gray blur of evergreens race past the windows. Rain pattered softly on the windshield, and the wipers swept it away like a nervous tick, rhythmic, relentless. I didn't stop for coffee. My stomach was too tight, knotted with memory and dread. Every mile closer brought back the scent of wet cedar, of sand in my shoes, of long silences echoing down the wide, echoey halls of the house. When the cliffs came into view, my fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel. The estate looked the same. Somehow that made it worse. The long drive up the gravel path hadn't changed. Same curve at the end, same wind-warped mailbox leaning to the left. But the windows were darker now, and the paint, once a crisp eggshell, had faded into something ghost-like. I parked out of view behind the overgrowth near the western fence line. I didn't have a key, Not yet, but I still remembered how the side door's latch never quite clicked shut unless you yanked it from the inside. The house groaned when I stepped inside, like it remembered me. The air was colder than I expected, musty, damp, but familiar. I moved slowly, listening. No creaks upstairs, no rustling, just the hum of wind slipping through unseen cracks. Then I climbed. The attic stairs were exactly as I remembered. Steep, narrow, one of them looser than the rest. I stepped over it out of habit. Dust swirled in the beam of my phone's flashlight. The attic wasn't big, but it felt endless in the dark. Old suitcases, moth-eaten quilts, boxes with my mother's handwriting. Everything sagged under the weight of being forgotten. Then I saw it. The old trunk. I knelt in front of it. Its brass hinges were green with age, and the latch let out a reluctant click. The lid groaned open like something resisting the light. Inside, old photographs, brittle letters, a few of Dad's books. And then at the bottom, folded inside a cracked, leather-bound notebook, a sealed envelope. My heart caught. The handwriting on the front, sharp and slanted, unmistakably his. But no name, no address, just a date. September 14th, 2015, the year everything fell apart. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. The paper was stiff, dry at the edges, like it might tear if I breathed wrong. I hesitated, then slid my finger under the seal. Inside, a letter, short, unfinished. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I wish I'd done more. I left a failsafe, a legal protection in case they try to take it all. The estate was never meant to be sold. There's a trust, one with very specific terms. If the taxes lapse, the title falls into your hands. Only you. You have to act fast. The rest is... That was it. The page ended mid-sentence. No signature, no second page. Just that hint, that thread of hope, dangling. I flipped through the notebook. Nothing else. Just gardening notes, sketches of the bluff, a torn corner of a receipt. I leaned back, my breath loud in the attic stillness. Why hadn't he sent this to me? Why leave it buried up here? Unless... He hadn't meant to, unless someone found it first. I shoved the letter into my coat pocket, heart hammering. My mind raced. Was the trust real? Could it still be activated? Had Vespera found this already and destroyed the rest? I stood, brushing dust off my knees, and started for the stairs. Then I heard it. A soft creak from below. I froze. Nothing. Just wind, I told myself. But I didn't breathe again until I was back outside, soaked by the rain and shivering from more than the cold. In the car, I slammed the door shut and locked it twice. The letter sat on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. If Dad was right, if the trust was real, I might have a chance. But if it was missing, if Vespera got to it first... I turned the key in the ignition but didn't shift into gear. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I thought of the date on the envelope, the year he died, the year Vespera convinced everyone I was unstable, that I'd cut myself off. I hadn't cut them off. They erased me. And now I had something they didn't know I had. Or maybe they did know, and they were hoping I'd never find it. My phone buzzed. Blocked number. I didn't answer. A voicemail came through a second later. I played it on speaker. A voice I hadn't heard in years. Vespera. You shouldn't have gone back to the house. Her tone was light, but I could hear it, the steel beneath the sugar. There's nothing left for you there, Elyra. Stay out of it. For your own sake. My throat closed. She knew. Somehow she knew. But she was wrong about one thing. There was something left for me there, and this time I wasn't leaving empty-handed. The next morning, the letter felt heavier in my pocket than it had the day before. I hadn't slept, not really. Just lay there in my apartment staring at the ceiling. The edges of Dad's unfinished message burned into my eyelids. There's a trust. The title falls into your hands. Only you. I kept replaying that voicemail, too. Vespera's voice, so calm, so smug. You shouldn't have gone back to the house. She knew something, maybe everything, but she didn't know what I knew now. And that was my advantage, if I moved fast. I called Jorah. It rang twice. Elyra? Her voice was thick with sleep and static. It's barely 7. You okay? I need your help, I said. Legal help. I didn't even bother with small talk. I couldn't. There was a pause, then a shift in her tone. Alert, steady. I'm listening. We met that afternoon in a corner booth of a tiny cafe off Alberta Street, the kind with peeling walls and old jazz floating from the speakers. The window beside us fogged up quickly from the cold. Jorah showed up in a denim jacket and a ponytail, still scribbling notes on a legal pad. "Start from the top," she said, setting her phone on airplane mode. "Tell me everything." I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, then again. Her brow furrowed deeper each time. "A trust clause?" she said. "Did he ever mention setting one up?" "Not to me, but he always made these offhand comments about keeping the estate safe, about making sure Vespera couldn't touch it." Jorah tapped her pen against the table. "If he created a trust with a reversion clause and the taxes lapsed under certain conditions, it could automatically default to the next beneficiary." "Which would be me," I said, "if he named me." "That's the problem," she said. "This letter isn't enough. It's not notarized, it's not filed, and it's missing the second page. For a trust clause to hold up, we'll need to find the actual documents. And fast." I rubbed my temple. The cafe light flickered slightly overhead. My coffee had gone cold. "What do I do?" I asked, "if she's already moving to sell?" "Then you have one shot," she said. "We pull the estate records. If there's a trust, it has to be on file somewhere. County records, maybe state archives if he set it up before they transferred the title." "Can you access that?" She cracked a tight smile. "You forget what I do for a living?" Later that night, she called me from her office. "Elyra," she said, voice crackling through the line, "I found something." I held my breath. "There's a trust," she said. "Registered under Holt Holdings Trust, dated 2007. There's a clause in the event of lapsed taxes or fraudulent sale. Title reverts to the secondary beneficiary. Your name is on it." My knees buckled. I had to sit down. "It's real?" "It's real. And here's the kicker. Property taxes on the estate lapsed last quarter. Vespera never renewed them." I stared at the wall, heart pounding. "I can activate it? If we file the petition before the transfer is finalized, yes. But you'll need to act tomorrow. Sign, notarize, and deliver, and we keep this quiet." A laugh bubbled up in my throat. Not joy, just disbelief. I could actually win this, quietly, legally, without screaming, without begging. I could take the house back. But deep down, something still tugged, a shadow of doubt. Why had Dad hidden the letter? Why not tell me while he was alive? And why was Vespera so calm? I signed the papers the next day at Jorah's office, the ink smudging just slightly under my trembling hand. The notary, a kind older woman with too red lipstick, stamped it with a sharp thunk. I walked out of the building into cold Portland air, the papers clutched in my hand like a live wire. This was happening. I was the legal owner of the estate now. The trust had kicked in, and nobody, especially not Vespera, saw it coming. I drove back home in a fog, pulled into my apartment parking spot, and sat in silence, engine off, the heat from the vents fading fast. I had it. The house, the legacy, the piece of myself they tried to erase. But I couldn't celebrate. Not yet. Because in my gut, something twisted. Jorah had found the clause too easily. No resistance. No sign of tampering. And Vespera's voicemail? It hadn't sounded like a bluff. It sounded like a warning. She was letting me think I'd won, which meant she had something worse up her sleeve. The papers had barely cooled from the notary stamp when I called Vespera. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Logic would have said keep quiet, let the legal process unfold in silence and surprise. But my chest felt like it was closing in, pressure building with every breath. I needed to hear her voice. No, I needed her to hear mine. It rang 4 times. Then she picked up. "Wow," she said, her tone light, playful, like this was a game we used to play. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" I swallowed hard. The cold from the phone seeped into my hand. "Why are you selling the estate?" I asked. No emotion, just steel, silence, a beat, then laughter, short and sharp. "You think this is about selling property? God, Elyra, you haven't changed a bit." That stung. Not because it was new, but because it was old, familiar. Her words always cut deeper when they were dressed in false affection. "I saw the listing," I said. "I saw the LLC it's registered under. I know what you're doing." There was a pause. Then her voice dropped, low and tight. "Don't call me again." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the call button again, but I didn't press it. She knew. She was rattled, not enough to show fear, but enough to hang up. And in Vespera's world, silence was never surrender. It was a strategy. That night, I couldn't settle. I paced the apartment, the wooden bird Dad gave me sitting on the kitchen table, watching like it knew what was coming. My mind kept circling back to her voice, the way she'd said my name, like it was dirt in her mouth. She was planning something. The next morning, Jorah called. "Elyra," she said, already tense. "You're not going to like this." I braced myself. She filed a counterclaim, claims she has legal control of the estate through a separate trust agreement, says you forged yours. My throat went dry. What? She submitted paperwork through the county clerk's office. It's dated last week. Her trust supersedes yours, if it holds. But mine is real. I know. Hers is fake. But the burden's on us now to prove that. I slumped into the kitchen chair. The surface was cold through my pajama pants. She forged legal documents? I asked, voice low. She didn't just forge them, Jorah said. She got them filed, with a clerk's stamp. Either she bribed someone or scared the hell out of them. Of course she did. This was Vespera. It wasn't just about erasing me. It was about staying 2 steps ahead. I need to see her documents, I said. Every page, every signature. If she faked something, there has to be a crack. I'll request the file, but Elyra, this won't be quick. She knows how to stall, and you can't let her see you panic. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I won't. But I already was. That evening, I found myself staring at the estate photo again. The real estate listing was still live. Price increased by $30,000. She was flaunting it. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I clicked Inquire, filled in the form, sent it anonymously, just to see what she'd do. Minutes later, an automated email popped up. Thank you for your interest in the Holt Coastal Estate. A representative will reach out shortly. I almost laughed. She had no idea the next inquiry was coming from the very person she tried to erase. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was draining into dusk, that cold Oregon blue-gray. The streetlights flickered on with a low hum. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Tired eyes, shoulders tense, jaw set hard enough to ache. She thought I was weak. Still that quiet girl in the corner of the room, forgotten at birthdays, tolerated at holidays. But I had proof now, and I had her attention. What I didn't have was time, and if she was willing to forge legal documents, who knew what she'd do next? I turned back toward the kitchen and sat down again, pressing my palms into the wood. Vespera wasn't going to let this go, and neither was I. The envelope came 3 days later, thick, official-looking, no return address, just my name, typed in bold on the front. Not handwritten, not personal. Cold, precise, like a threat delivered by someone who didn't have to raise their voice. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. My fingertips were damp with sweat, smudging the edge of the flap. Inside, a legal notice. Vespera had filed a claim asserting exclusive ownership of the Holt Coastal Estate. She'd submitted a trust document, dated, signed, and stamped, that overrode mine. I flipped through the pages. It looked legitimate, too legitimate, but something was off. The signature. It looked like Dad's, but the pressure was wrong. His loops were always tight. This one sagged, too loose at the tail. And the notary seal? The ink bled too much, like it had been scanned and reprinted. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. She hadn't just countered, she'd rewritten history. I called Jorah and read her the clerk's case number. She pulled it up while I sat frozen on my couch, heart pounding like a countdown clock. She's framing you, Jorah said flatly. This thing says you falsified documents, that your trust clause was a forgery submitted in bad faith. I pressed my hand to my forehead. It was ice cold. I signed it in your office, with a notary. I know, and I have the time-stamped footage and official logs to prove it. But Elyra, she's not just claiming the estate. She's setting you up to lose everything. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She was turning this into a war of credibility, and in our family, that was a war she'd trained her whole life to win. My mind flashed back to when I was 16, the day Mom accused me of stealing her pearl earrings. I hadn't even seen them, but Vespera had sworn she saw me near the dresser. Just passing through, she'd said with a shrug. I was grounded for 2 months. Later, I found the earrings in Vespera's jacket pocket. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it, just smiled and said, "Next time, don't make it so easy." That smile haunted me now. This was her signature move: ruin you quietly, then act like you did it to yourself. I looked out the window. A thin fog had rolled in, blurring the tops of the trees. I couldn't see the street anymore, just faint shapes moving in the distance. I wasn't sure if it was the weather or my own fear that made it feel like the walls were closing in. Jorah's voice broke the silence. "Listen," she said, steady but tight. "We fight this. We collect every timestamp, every official doc, every name she used. She forged these, Elyra. That's a felony. But how do we prove it? I start digging, but you need to stay calm. You can't spiral." Too late. That night, I dug out the original copy of Dad's letter again. I reread the line about the failsafe, the one he never finished. The rest is, that's where it had ended. It felt like the whole truth was right there, just on the other side of the paper. If I could just see through it, maybe I'd find a way to stop her. My hands were trembling again. She hadn't just challenged the trust. She'd accused me of fraud. If the court sided with her, I could lose more than the estate. I could lose everything: my credibility, my license, maybe even my freedom. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about breaking me. The house was just the battlefield. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and pictured the attic. The trunk, the photo albums. There had to be something else, some piece I missed. Dad wouldn't have left it all hinging on one letter, not if he knew what Vespera was capable of. I opened my eyes and whispered into the dark, "What else did you leave, Dad?" As if in answer, my phone buzzed. Blocked number, again. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" Silence. Then Vespera's voice. "You're wasting your time," she said calmly. "You think a trust clause is enough to beat me? You never did understand how this family works." I opened my mouth, but she cut me off. "You think you've won something, but all you've done is step into a game you were never built to play." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand. Then I stood up, grabbed my keys, and slipped the letter back into my coat pocket. If she thought this game was over, she didn't know what I'd learned in the years she left me out in the cold. I didn't plan to return to the estate that night, but after Vespera's voice curled around my throat like smoke, I couldn't sleep. Her words rang over and over in my ears. "You never did understand how this family works." I drove in silence. The highway was mostly empty, just headlights cutting through the coastal fog. Somewhere between mile markers and memories, I stopped thinking rationally. I needed answers, not from lawyers, not from court filings, but from the place itself. The house sat like a shadow at the end of the cliff road, tall and still, windows black. I parked a ways off, heart pounding in my ears. The door creaked open the same way it always had, like it recognized me. Inside, the air was heavy with damp wood and dust. I didn't turn on any lights, just used my flashlight and memory to guide me. Upstairs, attic, again. I should have been sick of it by now, but something kept pulling me back. That letter from Dad was just the first layer. If he left that behind, what else had he hidden? I stepped onto the attic floor, and the boards sighed beneath my weight. The trunk was still there, open now, its contents slightly disturbed. Had I left it that way? I wasn't sure anymore. I crouched and started digging again, pushing aside papers, boxes, old books. Everything smelled like mildew and time. Then I found it. An envelope, tucked behind the trunk, wedged deep between floorboards and insulation. Yellowed, curled at the edges, but still sealed. Inside was a photo. Dad, me, Vespera. We were standing on the porch, the sun casting long shadows behind us. I must have been 8. Smiling, all teeth and tangled hair. Vespera stood a few feet away, arms crossed. Even then, her smile looked more like a smirk. But my face, it was scratched out. Not digitally, not aged. Deliberately scratched, with something sharp like a knife or nail, gouged until the paper tore. My breath hitched. Why would anyone keep a photo like that? Why keep it at all? I turned it over. A handwritten note on the back, in Dad's slanted script. The truth is in the walls. I read it twice. Then again. The truth is in the walls. Was it metaphor or literal? I pressed my hand to the attic wall nearest the trunk, cold, still, silent. Then the memory hit me, hard and fast. I was a kid sitting at the bottom of the stairs while Mom and Vespera fought in the kitchen. Their voices rose and fell like waves crashing into each other. "She doesn't belong here," Vespera hissed. "You know it. Dad's too soft on her. He's hiding things." "What do you want me to do?" Mom's voice trembled. "She's your sister. She's a threat." The word threat had stayed with me, even when I was too young to understand it. Now it made sense. I leaned closer to the wall and tapped it lightly, hollow. I dragged my fingers along the seams in the wood. Dust caught beneath my nails. Then I felt it, a gap. Thin, but enough. I pulled at it until the panel gave way with a dry pop. Behind it, a small space, barely wide enough to fit a shoebox. Inside, a manila folder. I slid it out with trembling fingers and opened it under the attic bulb. Inside were legal documents, copies, letters, a receipt for a safety deposit box dated 6 months before Dad died, a photo of Vespera in the clerk's office, time-stamped the same day the trust she submitted had supposedly been signed, but she was alone. And the signature on the document in the folder didn't match the one she'd filed. She forged it. I had proof. Hard, physical, undeniable proof. And she didn't know I had it. I stared at the folder, heart hammering, hands ice cold. This wasn't just my inheritance. It was my name, my history. They'd tried to erase me, even from the photos, but I was still here. And now I had something they didn't, the truth. The ocean air hit me like a slap when I stepped out of the house. Sharp, wet, charged with something I couldn't name. The folder was zipped into my coat, close to my chest like a shield. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Instead, I stood for hours at the edge of the cliffs behind the estate, watching the fog pull itself across the sea like a heavy curtain. My hands stayed tucked in my pockets, fingers wrapped tightly around the edges of the manila folder. I kept checking to make sure it was real. It was. And so was the moment that was coming. By morning, the sky had cracked open with streaks of pale pink. Seagulls circled overhead, and the waves below churned louder than usual, like they too were bracing for impact. Because today, they were coming. The Holt family reunion. I knew the date. It was printed right there on the invitation I was never meant to see. They'd arrive expecting champagne, laughter, staged photos on the lawn. Maybe a toast from Vespera about legacy and moving forward. They had no idea the house wasn't theirs anymore, and I wasn't the ghost they thought I'd stay. From my perch near the cliff, hidden by a row of twisted cypress trees, I spotted the first car around 10:13 a.m., a sleek black SUV with tinted windows, Vespera's style, through and through, then another, and another. Soon the gravel driveway was dotted with high heels, monogrammed luggage, and cousins I barely recognized. A parade of curated wealth. I watched them unload like nothing had changed, like they still owned the air around here. But the difference now, the house no longer belonged to them. I'd filed the reversal. I had the proof. I had Dad's truth. And the concierge I'd called 2 days earlier? He was waiting with the updated file in hand. From where I stood, I could just make him out near the entry, dressed in a gray blazer, clipboard tucked tight against his side. Calm, professional. At exactly 10:32, he stepped forward. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw the way Vespera's shoulders went rigid. She turned toward him, lips moving fast. Her hand motioned to the others like she was swatting flies, but he didn't back down. He pointed to the clipboard, then back at the house. Her body shifted. She glanced toward the bluff. For a second, I wondered if she could see me through the fog, and in that sliver of a moment, I almost stepped out. Almost walked down the hill, straight through the crowd, folder in hand. But no, I wanted her to stew in that silence, to question, to wonder. She'd never dealt well with uncertainty. The family gathered around her like bees to smoke. Some whispered, others laughed nervously. Then, movement. Vespera stormed up the porch steps, yanked open the front door. She disappeared inside. The concierge stayed outside, now talking to my mother, Maris. She wore pale blue. Always did. Her hair still pinned into that same soft bun from years ago, like time refused to move her forward. She looked confused, then sad. Not shocked, not furious, just tired. That stung more than I expected, because deep down, some quiet part of me, the daughter part, still wanted her to ask where I'd gone, or why I'd never come back. But she never had. She just let it happen. I turned away for a moment, heart pounding, eyes stinging, and when I looked back, the door slammed open again. Vespera burst out holding something. A phone. She was shouting now, at the concierge, at the sky, at whatever invisible threat she hadn't quite grasped. Then she froze. She turned slowly, facing the cliffs, facing me. I didn't move. We stared at each other across the long stretch of green. Wind whipped her hair across her face. Mine too. I could see her mouth something. One word. My name. She took a step forward, then another, and then I stepped back, just once, into the shadows of the trees. Let her wonder, because this time I had the upper hand. And the game wasn't over, not even close. She showed up at my door just before sunset. No warning, no text, just 3 sharp knocks, the kind meant to rattle you before the door even opens. I didn't flinch. I'd been waiting. I opened it slowly, not all the way. Vespera stood there, perfectly put together. Lipstick sharp, hair pinned tight, not a strand out of place, but her eyes, they were wild. "You think this is funny?" she hissed, showing up to the reunion like some ghost from the attic? I said nothing. Let the silence stretch until it hurt. Her breath fogged in the cool air. "You don't belong here, Elyra. You never did. This," she motioned past me toward the house, "was never yours. Then why are you so scared?" That hit her, quick and clean. She tried to laugh, but it cracked halfway out. "You really think you can win?" I stepped back, opened the door wider. "Come in." She hesitated, then crossed the threshold like she owned the floor beneath her. She always had that walk, like the world owed her permission. I led her to the sitting room. The fireplace was already lit, casting long shadows across the walls. On the table sat a single device, my phone, screen dark, but recording. She didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. She perched on the edge of the armchair, knees crossed, eyes never leaving mine. "You're playing a dangerous game," she said. "So are you." We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then I leaned forward. I found the folder in the wall, the photo, the note from Dad, the deposit slip. A flicker crossed her face, but she caught it too late. "Whatever you think you found, it won't hold up in court." "You forged his signature." Her lips parted just slightly, then pressed together again. "You filed it through a clerk you bribed. The timestamp from the photo puts you there alone. No notary, no witness. And I have the image." "That's not admissible. But it's enough for Jorah to subpoena the deposit box, and enough for the clerk to start talking." Vespera's hand twitched, a tiny, involuntary movement. I knew that twitch. I'd seen it 100 times growing up, whenever she got caught lying but hadn't figured out her next move yet. "I don't care what you think you have," she said, her voice low, "because I still have the one thing you never will." "What's that?" She leaned in. "Control." She was bluffing. I could see it now, the crack behind her eyes, the panic she wrapped in velvet. I picked up the phone and stopped the recording. She blinked. "What was that?" "Insurance," I said. The color drained from her face. "You recorded me? I gave you a chance to walk away." She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back a few inches. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said quietly. "That was 10 years ago, when I left and didn't fight back. That was the mistake." Her fists clenched, but she didn't say another word. She turned and walked out, heels sharp against the floorboards. The door slammed behind her. I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The house was silent again, save for the soft crackle of the fire and the distant crash of waves outside. I played back the recording, her voice clear and cutting. "You really think you can win? Whatever you think you found, it won't hold up in court. I still have the one thing you never will: control." She admitted everything but didn't even know it. It was enough. Jorah could use it. It wouldn't be the final nail, but it was another wedge, another crack in Vespera's perfect mask. I stood at the window and watched her car disappear down the winding drive. The wind picked up, the trees shivered. I turned back to the table, grabbed the folder, and thumbed through the pages again. Then something caught my eye. A torn receipt, half folded, different from the others. I hadn't noticed it before. I opened it fully. A bank transaction. Not from Dad, from Mom. Dated 2 weeks after his funeral. A wire transfer to Vespera. I stared at the name, the amount. It was substantial. Why would Mom pay her? For what? My stomach twisted. This wasn't just Vespera. It was bigger. And suddenly I wasn't sure who had betrayed me first. The courthouse in Salem wasn't intimidating. Not in the way you'd expect. It was sterile, quiet, almost too quiet. Like a place where truths didn't shout, they whispered, then got buried under paperwork. I stood just inside the doors, my coat clutched tightly in both hands, the folder pressed against my ribs like armor. My boots clicked softly against the polished floor as I crossed the lobby toward courtroom 3B. Jorah was already inside. I caught sight of her through the crack in the heavy doors, blazer crisp, laptop open, eyes scanning documents with a surgical calm I envied. I took one last breath before pushing the door open. Inside, it smelled of old wood and cold air. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in an unforgiving glow. And there she was, Vespera, poised in her seat, next to a man I recognized immediately, Frederick Lang, a legal bulldog with a reputation for twisting facts into knots. Her posture was perfect. Her lips curled in a soft, smug smile when she saw me, but there was tension in her eyes. She hadn't expected me to show up with more than a tantrum. The judge, stern, middle-aged, and clearly not one to suffer nonsense, called us to order. Lang stood first. "Your Honor," he said, "we request the immediate dismissal of the petitioner's claim. The trust she presents was filed after the estate's transfer proceedings had already begun. Further, the document in question bears irregularities in formatting and timeline that suggest it is, at best, incomplete and at worst, deliberately falsified." He didn't say forged, not outright, but the implication hung in the air like static. I watched Vespera's hands, perfectly still in her lap. She didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Lang was doing her dirty work for her. Jorah stood next, calm, measured, deadly. "With respect, Your Honor, the trust clause we present was filed within the valid time frame, as evidenced by county timestamps and notarized records. The supposed transfer proceedings were initiated under a forged secondary trust submitted by the respondent, which we will demonstrate in evidence today." The judge leaned forward. "You're alleging fraud?" "Yes, Your Honor. And we have both forensic analysis of the signatures and photographic proof that contradicts the timeline of the respondent's claim." A murmur spread through the small gallery behind us. Vespera's jaw flexed. Just slightly. I watched her closely. I knew that flicker, the moment control began to slip. Jorah clicked her laptop, and the screen behind her lit up. Photo of Vespera, time-stamped, entering the clerk's office alone. A close-up of the trust signature, and another of Dad's authentic writing side by side. The differences were subtle, but fatal. Lang objected. "Your Honor, we weren't given these exhibits in advance." Jorah didn't miss a beat. "They were filed within the discovery window, page 14 of the supplemental packet." The judge flipped the pages in front of him, then nodded. "Overruled. Proceed." My pulse thudded in my ears. Then came the audio. I hadn't wanted to use it. Part of me still thought it was too intimate, too raw. But this wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about truth. The courtroom filled with her voice. "Whatever you think you found, it won't hold up in court. I still have the one thing you never will. Control." She didn't deny forging the document, didn't admit it either, but the tone, the confidence, the arrogance, it told the story. When the audio cut off, the room was silent. The judge looked directly at her. "Miss Holt, would you like to respond to these allegations?" Vespera stood slowly, every inch of her screaming elegance, but the edges had frayed. She tried to speak, but the words came out flat, practiced. "There's been a misunderstanding. My father and I had spoken about alternate arrangements. The documentation was delayed but legally binding." "Do you have corroborating evidence of this?" the judge interrupted. Her lawyer shuffled beside her. Vespera hesitated. "No," she finally said. "Not at this time." The words landed like a crack across the floor. The judge closed the file in front of him. This case will move forward to full review, but based on today's preliminary hearing, the court acknowledges sufficient evidence to support the petitioner's claim to the estate. The matter of the forged trust will be investigated further under separate proceedings. He banged the gavel once, and just like that, the power shifted. It wasn't final, not yet, but it was a blow she hadn't expected to take in public. Outside the courtroom, the wind had picked up. Leaves swirled through the parking lot. Jorah and I stood by my car. "She's going to come at you harder now," she said. "You know that, right?" I nodded. "Let her." Because now I wasn't just fighting for property. I was fighting to drag the truth into the light, no matter who else it scorched along the way. The wind off the cliffs had always been sharp, but that morning it felt different, like it was carrying something away. I stood on the balcony of the coastal estate, the sun finally breaking through after days of overcast skies. The gulls circled below, distant but loud, as if they too sensed a shift. Inside, the house was quiet. Not empty, just lighter. It was over, at least on paper. The judge's ruling came down that morning. The trust I submitted was valid, the recordings and records admissible, and Vespera's actions, while still under criminal investigation, were deemed deliberate acts of fraud. The estate was mine, not just legally, but undeniably. The first time I stepped through the front door after the ruling, I expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, whole, but all I felt was tired. I walked room to room, sunlight cutting across old wooden floors, revealing decades of footprints, secrets, and silence. Jorah had offered to come with me, so had a few others, but I needed to do this part alone. The living room still smelled faintly of cedar and the old leather chairs Dad used to sink into with a book. I ran my fingers along the edge of the fireplace mantel, the same one I used to hide behind during arguments I wasn't supposed to hear. Every step reminded me of who I used to be and who I had to become to make it back. Upstairs, I found my mother packing. She didn't look surprised to see me. Her hands moved slowly, folding a pale blue sweater into a suitcase that already sat half-zipped. "I heard the ruling," she said softly. "Congratulations." I didn't say anything right away, just watched her fingers smooth the edge of the fabric like it was the only thing she could control. "You paid her," I said, voice even. Her hands froze. "I found the transfer slip," I continued, 2 weeks after Dad died. A wire to Vespera. She closed the suitcase, sat on the bed. "She said it was what your father wanted," she said finally. "She said you weren't coming back, that you'd left for good. And you believed her." She looked at me then, really looked. "I didn't want to lose both of you," she whispered. "I thought if I gave her what she wanted, she'd stop pushing, that maybe somehow things would just settle. They didn't." She nodded slowly. "No, they didn't." The silence between us felt years wide. "I needed you," I said, "and you stood there while she buried me." Her shoulders dropped, her eyes welled, but no tears fell. "I was weak," she admitted. "I let her win because I didn't know how to fight her. You did." I didn't know whether to feel proud of that or just broken by it. She stood, pulling the suitcase upright. "I'll be gone by noon." "I'm not kicking you out," I said, "but I'm not pretending anymore either." She paused in the doorway. "I'm sorry, Elyra, for all of it." Then she left. Not storming, not sulking, just gone. Later that afternoon, I found myself back in Dad's old office. The window was cracked open, the sea breeze fluttering the pages of a forgotten book on the desk. I sat down in his chair. The leather groaned under my weight, familiar and foreign all at once. On the shelf beside me sat the wooden bird he'd carved for me, the one I thought I'd lost. Someone had placed it there. Maybe Mom, maybe Dad, long ago. Maybe no one. I reached for it, ran my fingers along the smooth wings. I remembered the way he handed it to me that night in the cabin. "This place is yours to keep." Now it was. But the price? The fight had cost me a part of myself I wasn't sure I could get back. Still, for the first time in a decade, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't erased. I was here. The last of the cars pulled out of the driveway around 5. Vespera's SUV was the last to go. I watched from the upstairs window as she backed out, not looking back once. She hadn't spoken a word to me since the ruling. Just stared across the courtroom with that tight, furious smile, the one that said she hadn't lost. Not yet. But she had, and she knew it. I stayed by the window until the sound of gravel under tires faded completely. Then I let the silence settle. But just as I turned to leave the room, a knock echoed from downstairs. Not a hard one. A slow, deliberate knock. I froze because everyone was supposed to be gone. The knock echoed again. Slow, deliberate. I descended the stairs without a word. The floor creaked beneath me, but everything else was still. The estate held its breath. When I opened the door, she was standing there. Vespera. No makeup this time. No blazer. Just her, stripped of polish, holding a small box in both hands like it might break. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "Or beg." I didn't respond. She stepped inside without being invited, her boots damp from the morning mist. We stood in the entryway, where we used to race in from the cold, dripping wet and laughing, where Dad used to hang his coat and Mom yelled at us for muddy footprints. But that was a long time ago. "I didn't come to apologize," she added. "I know what I did." She set the box down on the hallway bench and stepped back. "It's Dad's, yours now. I found it after the hearing." I opened the box slowly. Inside, the original trust papers, unforged. His signature, real, clean, dated before any of hers. A letter sat on top, addressed to me. I unfolded it with shaking hands. "Elyra, if you're reading this, it means the truth made it to you after all. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better. I trusted the wrong people to do the right thing. This house, this legacy, was always yours. Not because of bloodlines or entitlement, but because you understood what it meant to carry something with care. You were always the heart of this place. Don't let them convince you otherwise." I felt something shift inside me, not closure, not relief, something quieter. Vespera watched me read it. She didn't speak. "Why now?" I finally asked. She shrugged. "Because you won, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore." She glanced at the staircase, at the walls lined with family photos, all curated by her over the years, each one an edited version of the truth. Maybe I thought if I controlled the house, I could rewrite what actually happened inside it. A pause. "But you still remember. You always did." I didn't reply. "I'm leaving," she said. "For real this time." I nodded. "I believe you." She opened the door again, the wind curling in around her legs. "You never stopped being his daughter," she said, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "I just hated how much he knew it." She left without waiting for a response. The door clicked shut behind her. Later that afternoon, I walked the halls alone, slowly. The estate wasn't haunted anymore, not by ghosts, not by lies, just memories. And I could finally walk among them without flinching. In Dad's old office, I hung the wooden bird in the window where the light could catch it. It swayed gently in the sea breeze, casting a soft shadow on the floor. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just stood there, letting the moment settle. There was nothing left to fight for, because I had already reclaimed what mattered, not the title, not the trust, but the story. Mine, whole, undistorted, finally back in my hands. Some legacies aren't written in deeds or wills. They're passed in the quiet promises we make to ourselves. I will not be erased. I will remember what they tried to bury. I will rise where they hoped I'd disappear. And now, I can tell this story not with rage, but with truth. If you've ever been shut out, silenced, told you didn't belong in your own family's story, know this. Your silence doesn't make you weak, and your voice, when it finally rises, can bring down everything built to exclude you. Before you go, if this story resonated, if you saw yourself in any part of it, like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone else who needs to feel heard. And join me next time for another story where silence is broken and truth finally wins.